When injury takes you out of the game, it's time for your team to step up. At Align Health Orthopedics, you'll get expert care backed by a whole health system of providers. With convenient locations, virtual options, and an app that gives you 24/7 access to your records, test results, and care team, you're always close to the care that you need. Schedule now at alignerhealth.org/ortho.
Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on when this finds you. Welcome to the Sound of the Loons podcast presented by Align Health Orthopedics. I'm Steve McPherson, and today is another Flintstones Jetsons crossover episode with Callum and Kyndra de St. Aubin. As we look back at the first, I believe it's sixth of the season, roughly, I suppose. It's been a real, I believe I said this in a meeting the other day, it's a real how it started, how it's going beginning to the season for Minnesota United with starting with 4-game losing streak, and then now 2 wins in a row. So it's been, I would say it's been up and down, but it's really literally just been down and then up. So let's start here. Welcome, guys. It's always fun to bring everybody together who's podcasting from Minnesota United. First of all, Kyndra, welcome. How is it going? Let's just start with the personal check-in. How are you doing this week?
I'm doing great. We were out at training yesterday, and it was a glorious day, a nice little temperature, a little rain here, getting everything a little bit greener, and loving the heat and the humidity. I'll take it. I know we have a short stint of it here in Minnesota, so all good, and coming off 2 wins in a row, which, I think it brightens everybody's mood just a little bit.
Yeah, the last time Cal and I had a podcast, we were talking about the ramifications of 4 losses in a row, and what if it's 6 losses in a row? So it's quite a turnaround. Personally, I hate the heat and humidity, but I can understand people have different opinions. Cal, what's your feel right now?
Yeah, look, training was very good, as Kyndra insinuated yesterday, but I was distinctly miserable because of heat and humidity. My pale English-Irish skin just doesn't do very well at all in it, and it's just pretty gross for me. But the football was lovely. It was great to sit back and watch the team have a really competitive session. 1 or 2 players were able to have a little bit of a rest, which was good to see. But I'm doing very well, Steve, and thankful that we've got a little bit of an off weekend, because it has been go, go, go is probably the best way to describe it. And then looking forward to the game against Real Salt Lake before the international break.
Yeah, let's. I'm already going to go off script here. Let's talk a little bit about training, because it's one of those things that you guys have gotten to go back for the first time. I did not go this week, but I expect before too long I'll be back to check out training. Maybe it gives you a little better sense again of like what you have missed by not being at training, and what sort of training can help you get a grip on. I mean, obviously there's things that, we're not talking about specifics as far as like formations or anything like that, but like Kyndra, let's start with you. What do you see at training sort of week in and week out that you've missed it when you haven't been able to be there and now you get to be there?
I take a lot from training, and trust me, it depends on the day, right? I mean, we know that depending on the day, what they've got going on that week. I mean, as Cal insinuated, yesterday was a very energetic training session, knowing that they don't have a game this week. They did a lot of fitness, but fitness in playing. They did 1v1s to big goals, then it went to 2v2, 3v3, that kind of stuff. And it's just nonstop, where Sean McCauley, the assistant coach, just keeps ditching, throwing balls out there and just keeps it going. So just fun kind of stuff like that, the competitive nature. But what I gain a lot from training, and not even so much as just formations, is the chemistry amongst the players, the relationship that they have with each other, who is clicking, who is not, who's having an off day. Is there a little bit of a scuffle? The competitive nature, the personalities come through in training sessions. And I think that's what I glean a lot from practice, is just sort of reading the vibe. And then, of course, when it's match day -1, we get to see more of the formation, maybe who's, dealing with a little bit of an injury, a niggle or something like that. And most importantly, hearing what Adrian's conversations are with the players and what he wants from them tactically going into a game. So I glean a lot from going to practice. I've always been that way. When I covered baseball, basketball, anything, I would go to morning skate. I would go to morning shoot around. I'd go to batting practice. Some days you get nothing out of it, and some days you get a ton out of it. But you never know, and you don't want to miss that day that something might happen.
Yeah. What about you, Cal?
Yeah, I think it's more important for the analyst, really, as Kyndra was saying a little earlier on, because from a tactical point of view, we do get a lot from going to training. And we're very fortunate with the relationship we have with the coaching staff at Minnesota United that they will just tell us stuff. And I don't know why. Obviously, we've all worked together for a number of years now, and there's an element of comfort for sure. But there was one session. Was it last week? Was it Kay, where we got absolutely nothing from training, and it was just light soccer, tennis, just fairly pointless, really, from our point of view. I'm sure the players got something from it. And we had no idea what the team was, how they were going to approach it at all. And the assistant manager, Ian Fuller, came over to us and just ran through everything with us. And it was just such wonderful insight that you don't get if you don't go to training and if you don't have these relationships. So, as I said, I think it's more important for the analysts, for sure, from a tactical standpoint. But from a play-by-play perspective, it can be incredibly informative. And obviously that's the role, is to provide information. So they can be incredibly useful, and it's really good that we get to go back to them on a regular basis. And
I can't tell you too how many times we've heard, someone yelling at someone, and this is player to player, and just like, it just is insight into personalities and how people handle things and conversations that are going on the side, where it's coaching or amongst players, and a veteran taking a youngster, a rookie under their wing, and what they're having the conversation. Sean McCauley was doing that a lot yesterday in that small-sided game with Justin McMaster and Dane St. Clair talking to him. So I think too, that just gives me a little window into training and what the players and the coaching staff are like. And I just think that's super helpful, because I'm a big reader of body language too. And I think, teammates can feed off of that as well.
Yeah, I think it's really, I think for me, it's always given me a sense of just how a little of the iceberg you see at a game. Because again, a game is 2 hours out of the week, when this is a more than full-time job for the players and for the coaching staff. And that even going to training, you're only seeing, if you're seeing 10% at the game, you're maybe getting up to 20% if you go to training, because there's just a lot that you're never going to sort of get to see, as far as, the players at mealtime, the players in lifting sessions, that like all that stuff, the coaches in film sessions, like you don't get access to that stuff. You begin to just at least appreciate that there's so much more that goes on than you see. And also, but what you do get to see, like you're talking about body language and players and how they get at each other and stuff like that. It's one of those things that's always struck me about, I'm going to pick out Ethan Finlay in particular as a guy who, if you watch him on the field, he has like a ceaseless motor, like he's always going. And I think it's sometimes you see him, you're like, you're just going 100 miles an hour. It's, like he doesn't necessarily have the greatest take on dribble skills, like sort of like the ball handling, but you just know he's going to give everything he has. That extends into practice. If you ever see Ethan in practice, it's like he never stops going at people. And I think that in itself is a tremendously valuable trait, for a player to have. And it's the thing that coaches value, because he's always going to be giving it his all, whatever he does.
Yeah, I think, what was it? We might have said this yesterday, Kay, at training, that Ethan Finlay is, he's about as blue collar as they come in terms of a professional soccer player. And I mean that in a positive light. And I think everybody needs somebody like an Ethan Finlay on a roster for sure. He was the perfect signing for Minnesota in 2017, being the expansion year and what have you. He's a little bit different to what Minnesota United have in terms of those wide options now as well. So, but the one thing that is obvious with Ethan Finlay is his work ethic, as you've insinuated already, Steve, and his want and lust to perform on a consistent basis. He's a wonderful professional, and I think would be a good signing for just about anybody in Major League Soccer and several leagues overseas as well. So I think he's a really good asset to Minnesota United. And I just wonder now, my biggest thing moving forward, Steve, knowing of the signing that I'm sure we're going to talk about at some stage that's come in now, knowing Robin Lod's preferred position, knowing the emergence of Justin McMaster, I wonder what we consider now to be Ethan Finlay's role. Is he one of these players that is going to have to be happy with coming off the bench? Or what I'm expecting, is he one of these players that will continuously fight in training and be knocking on the manager's door saying, hey, why am I not playing? Why am I not playing? I'm Ethan Finlay. I'm an MLS Cup finalist. I've got a couple of caps for the national team. And as I said earlier on, Steve, he's very, very different to what they have compared to who I now consider to be the two starters in those wide positions. So I think he's a really good player to have around for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to get into that. That's a lot of fun stuff, but I don't want to get all the way off of the track that I had started, because now we're 10 minutes in. I haven't even started with the where I was going to start. So this is sort of like a check-in, early season check-in. We will get into signings that have announcements of signings that are coming out, and sort of the impact of that stuff. Before we get there, I just sort of want to do a little overview of the MLS season as a sort of concept, because one of the things that's always interesting to me is, as we saw, Minnesota United started the season before the season was expected to, be in one of the best teams in the West, started on a 4-game skid, like things are all get turned around once the season starts. What, in your guys' opinion, I'll start with you, Kyndra, what is the point during the season, a 34-game season, where you can sort of start telling who a team actually is? Like, you sort of start to even out the noise of losses, or facing unexpectedly good teams or unexpectedly bad teams. What's the point in the season where you can sort of start making those assessments of this is who this team is?
Well, I think in the past, and maybe it even depends on the club, I would have said, by the midway point. But then you had Seattle Sounders, who on more than one occasion didn't really flip the switch and turn it on until the second half of the season. They were kind of a second half of the season kind of team, and you could never count them out. And then all of a sudden they became that. But I think in general, I would honestly say the midpoint of the season, I don't write anybody off in the first 6-7 games of the season. And I even say that with some of the perennial, or, the bottom feeders, as we'll kind of call them, the ones that are always sort of sitting down and around the bottom of the Western Conference standings. And I'm just going to talk Western Conference right now, because I think that's probably what most people are interested in, that might be watching this. Mm-hmm. Like, Vancouver's had its struggles, and then Colorado's kind of had its up and downs. And then who knows what Real Salt Lake is going to be for sure, because they've got no owner and can't spend a certain amount of money. And as the coaching carousel continues, and I mean, I think we all had LA sitting at number 2 in the standings right now. And I mean, LA Galaxy, like, right. And who had LAFC sitting at the bottom in 13th. And if I'm Bob Bradley, I'm a little bit worried about that team. But that's a team that I would think is going to turn this thing around, is going to right the ship at some point, just based on the pure talent of that squad. But at the same time, there's certain times where you watch them and you're trying to figure out what they are. And normally with the Bob Bradley team, you know exactly what they are and what they're trying to do and what they're trying to accomplish. And right now, to me, they look a little bit disjointed. So, but to me, it's midpoint of the season. And then you can kind of start assessing the standings, and they look a little bit more solidified. And like, hey, guys, you might see some movement between 2 or 3 spots here and there, up and down, back and forth, especially now that we're playing mostly Western Conference opponents, the way the schedule is built. But I would say that that's my point. And even with the international break, even with kind of the wonkiness that we're continuing with in 2021, I would say midpoint of the season is when you can really start to look at teams and say, this is who they are. They're not bouncing into the playoff picture, and so is not dropping out.
Yeah. There's sort of those edge cases. It's sort of, I feel like it eventually breaks down in conference to like your top 2 or 3, and then the sort of a couple teams fighting for like, are they going to get home field or not? Then the couple teams fighting around the bottom of the playoff line. And then it's like the ones who are sort of below those, 8-9 spots, like that's probably where you're staying. Does that seem reasonable? And for a spot, Cal, as far as like halfway through the season, is that?
Imagine though, guys, if we had relegation. How would that change the conference? That's a whole nother podcast.
Oh my God, we're not going to open up that one yet.
We're just talking about the bottom of the barrel there. Imagine how that changes, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Let's just put the lid back on that one, shall
okay.
we?
Yeah.
As you're right, that is a separate podcast for another day. I've always measured teams after about a third of the season. So about 12 to 13 games, I think, is when you get to see at least what they've done in the opening third of the season. But for me, I because Kyndra said as well, especially in this league, in Major League Soccer, it's a league built on parity. So, as Kyndra quite rightly said, how many times have the Sounders had a horrendous start, and all of a sudden they've ended up in the playoffs and sometimes in the MLS Cup final, So it's more difficult in this league to judge because of the parity aspect of it. But I think I've always said, I think after about 10 games, I think it's fair for the consumer to be able to give their opinion at that point, about 10 games in. I'm not sure broadcasters, journalists, and people involved in the sport themselves can judge after 10 games because of the parity of MLS. But I think after 10 games or so is when the consumer can start perhaps making a point and give their opinion. But it's just so difficult in this league because of parity and because of the so. I mean, how many times have we all done a podcast and we said, don't fancy them this year, or they'll be good this year, and being completely wrong, just because of there's so many teams in this league that you have no idea what their approach is, how individuals are going to settle in whatever city they're in, how they're going to adapt to surroundings from a tactical point of view. This is there's many things that makes this league very, very unique. But the unknown of it, I think, is still what makes it one of the most unique leagues in the world.
Yeah, I think that I sort of see, these 2 points. In some ways, I sort of feel like maybe after a third of the season, so let's say in that 10 to 12 games, you start to be like, this is my sense of the team. And then the next couple of games up to that halfway point, you can then sort of say like, is this theory being borne out? And then the halfway point is a little more fair. The Sounders are sort of an outlier in that way. I mean, like they've really sort of grabbed that thing that the Lakers used to do in the NBA, where they were just like, well, let's just turn it on in the playoffs, which I guess the Lakers did that last night, actually, in the play-in games against the Golden State Warriors.
A play-in game in the NBA.
Like a play-in, not a playoff.
That's a whole nother thing. But to your point too, Cal and Steve, when we talk about at what point in the season and broadcasters and people that sort of live and breathe this league compared to the consumer who just enjoys the game, we also may be paying a little bit more attention to injuries, who's been available, who's not been available, whereas others might just be, paying attention to results. And that's fair. I do that for other sports where I'm not living and breathing it every day. So Carlos Vela still being out for LAFC, and we know what a difference maker he is. So I think there's different things that each year could be a little bit different, but in general, I would say by the midpoint, I can kind of get a feel for, okay, they've had some injuries. Other guys have stepped up. They had injuries. Their guys didn't step up. And then it kind of shakes out for me on who is going to be able to kind of withstand this crazy MLS schedule in the season and the wonkiness of the international breaks and everything else.
Yeah, the international breaks definitely provide, and the fact of transfer windows and international transfer windows, like more so than, other sports, there might be a blockbuster trade at the trade deadline or something like that. But in MLS, you have different points at which, difference-making players can come in and change the complexion of a season for a team entirely, like in the middle of the season. We saw that with Reynoso last year, right? Not changing the complexion entirely, but you look at Minnesota United before Reynoso and then after Reynoso is two sort of entirely distinct entities. Let's use that opportunity to switch and talk a little bit about the arrivals of Adrien Hunou and I'm trying to switch accents here. Franco Fragapane, who announced Fragapane's contract was announced yesterday, that he's signing with Minnesota United. The expectation is that they should at least be available for the game against RSL. Who knows exactly where they're going to fall in terms of readiness for availability. It's sort of a weird, they're coming again at this time where we've had 6 games. We have like a 2-week break, 1 game, and then like a 3-week break. So it's going to be a little bit weird to judge. It's hopefully it gives both of them kind of a nice runway. Like I think this RSL game is going to end up being sort of a weird outlier as far as just how the team feels, because things could be completely different in 3 weeks. But let's just start by talking about, the arrival of these 2 players who are expected to provide a lot in that attacking front four. Cal, let's talk to you first about that. Oh, we have no audio from Cal. He's okay. Kyndra, let's talk to you first.
I was going to say, that's the best Cal's ever sounded. No, I'm just totally kidding, because I get lots of compliments on Cal and his broadcast. He carries the load. But for me, this is one of those things. It's all about depth for me and quality of depth, because anytime you have an international player, regardless of how highly touted they come in, regardless of what club they are coming in from, you never know for sure what you're going to get, right? You never know how they're going to adjust to this league, adjust to MLS. It is a very different league than anything they've probably ever played before. And the travel is a big thing. I mean, we've heard that from so many coaches and players that have come into this league. So just on paper and what you can watch of the players actually playing in their prior leagues and their prior teams, absolutely. So I think massive additions in the attacking front four. And to me, this is about ball retention, possession, and creativity in the final third. That's what you're going to get from an attacking midfielder and a winger that are so good and can finish and can create. We saw what Emmanuel Reynoso can do when he plays with Robin Lod, when he played in 2020 with Kevin Molino, when Ethan Finley is at his best cutting inside and combining, when Hassani Dotson is that kind of player as well. And I've said this time and time again to Cal. This is what's important to me, is that you have players that can combine in tight spaces in and along the edge of the 18, and you're no longer just a service team, whipping balls in from the wing. That's more just like an alternate option if you need to switch up the attack. And I think Fragapane and Unu are going to be fantastic additions. I hope they acclimate to the United States, to Minnesota, to Minneapolis, to this club, and to this league really well. And I do agree with you, Steve. I think this RSL game is a bit of an outlier. And everybody that we have talked to, I asked Watto about it yesterday. We asked Manny about it. We've asked Adrian about it. Is it a positive or a negative that you just won 2 games and now you have this kind of weird break where you have 1 game in 4 weeks? They all seem to think it's a positive, and it couldn't come at a better time, because just rest, rejuvenate, almost a second preseason for some of these guys with new players, even Avila, who was thrown into the mix quickly. Now you get time to adjust with them in the mix as well.
Yeah, that's it's going to be. I feel like it's probably going to be that for a bunch of teams. I mean, not every team has this bye week that's coming in right now, but you look at a lot of teams: Columbus, Toronto, Portland, LAFC. Probably all teams that haven't started the season in quite the fashion that they expected to start the season, and that this is a chance to get a little bit of. I think I said it before, like a little runway into sort of acclimating these guys, and as you said, the travel thing is. To me, I think that's one of the things that it's not considered often because we're sort of used to it, and we see, teams flying in other sports all over the country and everything like that. I mean, MLS has been using charter flights because of the COVID pandemic, but they were flying, commercial before, and just basically, that was like anybody would fly. It means you have to get to the airport, 2 hours ahead of time. You spend time waiting at the gate, you fly, you like all that stuff. It sort of chips away, and you think about other leagues where in England, you're talking about like a couple hour bus ride to your farthest, you
could just drive to the other stadium, right, Cal? Like, right. Did guys just drive to another stadium in England?
Sorry, I just really didn't want to talk about Franco Fragapane then for a second.
You just bounced out. Yeah, no.
Yeah, absolutely. You can. Most days now. I think it's changing a little bit because I think there's more in terms of people are thinking about the mindset of the individual from a psychological, but also from a physical point of view as well. There's more times now that we see teams will drive to, say, for example, if you are playing in London and you're in Birmingham, that's about an hour and a half, 2 hour drive, or they may very well get the train. Which tends to be a little bit quicker in the UK. And they will stay the night before in the hotel, because you have to remember as well, guys, most of the time in England, the kickoffs are at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The latest one is usually 5:15 in the afternoon. So it can be difficult going down the day of, So, but yeah, to answer the question, Kay, yeah, absolutely. You do tend to drive, and then the day of the game, you often find yourself in your own bed, which it can be quite comforting at times, I must admit, yes.
Yeah, I mean, and sort of the same deal for, in France and a lot of these leagues, they're sort of within a country which is relatively small. If you look at one of those maps that shows actual sizes of different countries, like not based on the Mercator projection or anything like that, you realize how different the size of countries are than you would perceive them. And you're talking about these flights from, imagine team, when we fly to Vancouver, it's several hours to get a flight to get to Vancouver. You're going through 2 time zones. Like it's a lot. And it's a long season. And so to sort of get the chance to sort of get these guys in, you get a flight to RSL. You get to play at altitude, which is a great first experience probably, and then come back and sort of get in, 3 solid weeks of training into these new guys. I think it'll be great. Let's go back and talk a little bit about sort of these early results and sort of obviously what we're hoping to change from, with these a 4-game losing streak and then 2 wins, which were about as narrow as they come. When you're talking about scoring a goal in the 94th minute, that's probably not the way, Adrian would prefer to win games going forward by a single goal in stoppage time. So first of all, Cal, let's go to you since you're back. And now we don't have to talk about Fragapane. You can just talk about the 4-game skid, which we obviously touched on before on the podcast, but now that we've seen a 4-game losing streak and then a 2-game winning streak here, again, we talked about how futile it is to sort of judge teams after something like 6 games. But what do you see as the sort of curve? Like, is the team figuring something out, or how is it going?
I think, Steve, so first of all, as you mentioned already, we covered the 0-4 start on both podcasts here extensively. So we'll address that first, and I'll sort of put a bow on it, I think, by saying, look, every team in every sport, to my knowledge, goes through a bad run at some stage in their regular season. It just so happened that the bad run came at Minnesota United's start of the season. What I think it does now is it gives you less margin for error, for sure, but never did I think that was going to define the season at all. I just thought it was a bad run. And once Minnesota got themselves a victory, I thought they would be okay. So that's all easier said than done, though, isn't it? Just getting a victory. And they've done it. And Kyndra and I were talking about this, and I've spoken to this about this with a few people as well. It would have been good, and it would have been really good to have beaten Vancouver and Dallas, 3-4-0, and play this lovely, expansive, fast-flowing football, and done it comfortably. But actually, I think the manner in which they've won both games, particularly the Dallas game with the 94th minute winner, I actually think it takes more of the pressure off of the shoulders. And there is an even bigger sigh of relief, because if you do it comfortably and you win 2-3-0, it's like, oh, okay, what were we worried about? We'll be okay. But in actual fact, I think what it does is it may very well, as a player, you might, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Kyndra, you might take your foot off the gas a little bit because you're thinking, oh, what were we worried about? We were okay. But the fact that it wasn't as free-flowing and as expansive, and they had to win in the manner in which they did, and they did it so late, I think there's still plenty of evidence to suggest that the pedal needs to be pushed a lot more. The question is now, will they continue with that approach and continue to press on the pedal? I hope so, and I would assume so, because it's obvious there's still a lot more work to do, but I do think that winning in the manner in which they did, there's usually with a last-minute winner a lot more cause for celebration as well, just because of the nature of it. But I do think as well that the sigh of relief is even bigger than what a 2 or 3-0 win would have been. And as I said earlier on, I think there's still plenty of evidence to suggest, right, yes, they won, but there's still a lot of work to do. And the coaching staff and the players will all know that for sure.
Yeah, there's definitely something to be said for the idea that those blowout wins that you have in a season really don't, they just feel weird. If you think about like that 7-1 win over Cincinnati that Minnesota United had in 2019, or even like Darwin Quintero's hat trick, they're like, it's great and it's fun, but you're like, is this, it just feels weird, and it's not like a pattern or a thing that you can sort of build from. But Kyndra, like, again, sort of from a player's perspective, as somebody who's played the game at a higher level than I have, certainly, what is your feeling about that versus, like in terms of how you get those wins and what a close, gritty win can do for you as far as just reinforcing, like, yeah, we're getting better, but there's more work that needs to be done.
Well, and I think it's very similar too, in that the blowout win feels more like a fluke then almost, because that day, at that moment, everything is going your way, right? Everything is falling, everything is dropping. Now you still have to create the chances that are going your way, like a Darwin Quintero hat trick, or you still have, it's not that there's not skill involved or effort involved, but I do think that these last 2 wins showed that Minnesota United could win in different ways. And I say that even for the Vancouver win, because there they had a narrow lead and they held on to it. They found a way to close it out and get the points. And I think that was also very important to Adrian Heath, how they won that game. The fact that they didn't make mental errors. They didn't make mistakes. They kept possession of the ball. They made the right choices in tough spots on the field to not try to do too much and be simple, and came away with a 1-0 win. And then on the other hand, you had a second game in the week. So they played Wednesday and then Saturday, essentially the same guys, very few substitutions in the second half of that match, where these guys were gutting it out and finding a way to get the late game winner. So two different, close wins for me, but both equally as important in how they won the game. And even when Cal and I were talking ahead of our matches and in that 4-game losing streak is, well, what are we going to say if they lose this game? How are we going to handle it? And I kept saying, well, I think it kind of depends on how they lose. That makes a difference in how you're talking about it. And to me, it's the same way with how did they win the game. And I thought that the way they won those 2 games showed a lot of resilience, a lot of heart, a lot of cohesiveness in how they were handling it and making the right decisions and closing the game out. So I just thought those were 2 fabulous wins. Yeah, nothing to write home about. I think every player you talk to would say it wasn't pretty soccer, but they found a way to get it done. And there were moments of pretty soccer in there, just not a 90 minutes of pretty soccer in either match. So thank goodness for the turnaround.
Yeah, I will say as well, Steve, I think in this moment when they were 0-4, I think that's where the importance of the 1-0 victories come out. I think moving on into the season when they have a healthy record and whatnot, and you win 3 or 4-0, those things need to be praised. Those wins need to be identified as, right, this team is really, really good right now. And as I said earlier on, it would have been great to have those over the last week or so, but they weren't a necessity. They weren't needed. You just needed to win. And Minnesota, as Kyndra said, they found a way to do it in different ways as well. But I just think because of the manner of the victories, there was a huge weight lifted off the shoulders. And now I fully do expect at some stage, particularly at Allianz Field, Minnesota will beat several opponents 3-4-0.
Yeah. I'm going to give you my take after I do this read. When injury takes you out of the game, it's time for your team to step up. At Allina Health Orthopedics, you'll get expert care backed by a whole health system of providers with convenient locations, virtual options, and an app that gives you 24/7 access to your records, test results, and care team. You're always close to the care you need. Schedule now at allinahealth.org/ortho. All right. Did that set me up properly for this? So I mean, I think there's a couple different perspectives and a couple different ways to look at it. I had written an article, Beyond the Box article, which is where we sort of delve into some sort of nitpicky elements of games, basically looking at some of the analytical elements of it and looking through the lens of sort of expected goals, which again is a thing that we've talked about on the podcast before. And it's just sort of a quantitative way to measure like good chances. You hear Adrian talk about it all the time, like we're creating opportunities, but we're not finishing them, things like that. So expected goals is just a way to look at that, to say like, how good were the chances you were getting, whether you finished them or not. And if you sort of look through that lens, you can sort of see that, like, the Seattle game was tough. I think you can see that Seattle is actually a much better team than we thought they were going to be this season. I mean, their results are pretty clear. They're on top of the Western Conference and have a goal differential that's like miles beyond the next closest team. So Seattle is quite good. The 2 games on either side of the Austin game, were actually the RSL game and the Colorado game were actually pretty close as far as expected goals. And I think you sort of saw that. It was like they hinged on a couple mistakes, a couple little problems. Expected goals for both teams were fairly close in those 2 games. So I think, again, that's a question of margins. We've talked about it before on the podcast, the question of the Colorado Rapids and sort of fatigue and sort of the team flagging late and things like that. The Austin game was just atrocious from that perspective. Like, I think Minnesota's expected goals were about half of what Austin's were. And that was a bad game. You saw in the 2 wins, Minnesota doing a much better job of creating chances and a much better job of limiting good chances on the other side as far as how the expected goals go. And again, it's not a blowout yet. It's a 1-0 game. It's pretty close, but you can sort of see that. Again, I think maybe the takeaway is that the 4-game losing streak was not as dire as it looked necessarily, and that the 2-game winning streak doesn't mean that everything's fixed. It means you're on the path back. And I think that's sort of looking through that lens. It's like it sort of brings down how terrible things sort of seemed and sort of maybe tamps down a little bit, saying like we've figured it all out, which I think is sort of echoes what you guys are saying from your perspectives as well.
I think the last thing I'll say about this is that it was exacerbated by two things for me. One, that we never had that happen to us in 2017, which seems mind-boggling, and people like want to remember and forget 2017 at the same time just because of the transition into MLS. And then also the fact that like Minnesota United was picked by several, and we thought, to be high up in the table, at the end of the season and contending for possibly an MLS Cup, because of the nature of the way 2020 ended and how good this team looked at moments. And regardless of losing Kevin Molino or not, people still felt good about this roster. So again, it was early on, but I think those were two things that exacerbated the 0-4 start and the thoughts about it. And even from within the club and amongst ourselves and myself included, that you just don't want to go down that path. And that was, you felt like the ship was going to be righted, but there's always kind of a pit in your stomach when you start out that way.
Yeah, it's one of those things where if one of those games, if the game against Colorado or RSL had been a draw, even, or both of those had ended up draws, which they could have, it would, the season would be looking a lot different. But it's like, and it's one of my favorite quotes, which I don't think it originates with Brent Callum, but he's the first person I remember talking to about it, where he said soccer is cruel. And that's just the thing, is like, and it sort of goes into that blowout thing as well. Like, I always compare things to the NBA. I'm sorry, I'm sure everybody's sick of this, but when you have a blowout win in the NBA, like every possession is not impacted by what happens on the possession before it. Like it's not, it is to a certain extent, but in soccer, what you often see, and the 4-0 loss at Seattle is a great example of this. It was a 2-0 game, and then Minnesota's just chasing, and then you start hemorrhaging goals. And so it's like, it's one of those sports where, like, when it's a blowout, that doesn't necessarily reflect what the texture of the game was. Like, it was a closer game than it looked, because you start giving up things on one end as you try to push forward and get something out of it on the other end. So, again, it's one of these weird things where results can be cruel, as as Brent Coleman said. Basically, let's take a moment. We're going to take some questions at the end here. I believe our producer Tyson is going to line up some questions have been coming in as we've been streaming. So we'll take some of those and address that stuff. I wanted to ask about guys on the team so far who you felt have really stood out and looked, good so far this season. I'm going to shout out Matt Neer, who looked fantastic in this past game, and just one of those, showing some of that flair from his first season here, where it just felt like he was all the way up and down the field constantly and just doing things, whatever he could, to keep the ball. I really enjoyed watching Matt Neer, who's my new adopted son. I guess let's start with Kyndra. Let's, who's somebody who has sort of stood out to you, or maybe shown you something you didn't expect before the season?
Well, and this may not be a fair selection, but I'm going to actually go with Ozzie Alonso, in the sense that I really didn't know what to expect from him in 2021. I think we saw his injury issues in 2021 and kind of the stop-start season that he had. We all know clearly what he's capable of, and the player that Ozzie Alonso is, and the leader that he is. But then also starting out with a little bit of a niggling injury in 2021, I didn't know what that was going to mean for him and how he was going to kind of fit back in. And I thought he stepped right in that match and played 67 minutes, followed by 90. I was insanely impressed with that. And it didn't look to me like he missed a beat. He held down the fort with Will Trapp in the center of midfield. I was excited about that pairing and how they could work together. So he pleasantly surprised me in that I just didn't know what to expect coming back into 2021. And I think the only other player that I think I was have been really impressed with, and this may not be another fair one, but Tyler Miller. I mean, double hip impingement surgery. We saw him walking around with his crutches last year when he was on our broadcast, and hardly being able to sit down and move. And you just don't know how a player is going to come back physically or mentally, especially when it's a goalkeeping position. And he didn't get the starting nod from the get-go. This is a guy who, Supporter Shield winner with LAFC, in the national team camps in the past. And all of a sudden now he's been bumped. He's been Wally pipped out of his position from the 2020 season, having dealt with an injury, and Dane St. Clair stepping up and playing well. So kudos to Tyler Miller for stepping back in and not letting it, he said to me the other day on the radio, I did a radio interview, and he was like, I'm like a rock in the bottom of the river where the water, everything flows around me, and I can't change it. I can only control myself. And that's like his mindset now. He's got this like mantra. And I just thought, I've been impressed with how he handled that, and then how he stepped right in and did really well.
Yeah, those are both good shouts. What, Cal? What about you?
The first person I want to highlight him for doing well, because I don't think people give him enough credit, because I think we forget that he's playing out of position, is Robin Lod. Again, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think he's done ever so well. He's been involved in five of Minnesota's goals, and I don't think people, because he does it so well, I think people forget that he's actually played out of position for the majority of the season so far. But the one I really want to focus on is Mr. Consistency himself, and that's Michael Boxall. Again, different centre-half pairings alongside him, two different goalkeepers behind him. He has to continuously deal with attacking-minded fullbacks, which is great in the system, but it often means he has to come across and cover. I think his man marking has been superb. His reading of the game has been wonderful. And you start to wonder, at the age of 32, sometimes you see players lose a little bit of a step, or at least half a step. And so far, he doesn't look like he's lost anything. And I think he's been a tremendous servant to the club. And we've said it on a few occasions now, but let's not forget as well, since Michael Boxall came into the club mid-2017, he's had 8 different partners at centre-back. And he's just not missed a beat throughout the entirety of that time. So to me, he's Mr. Consistent, and again, someone who I don't think gets anywhere near the credit he deserves.
Excellent. I am a long time and well-known Boxy fan, and he's been doing good. I think the other one I would add is I think that Will Trapp has been quite good in a quiet role. Again, I think he's not somebody who's going to break a game wide open, but I think he's been very valuable and has grown into his position. As the games have gone on. Also, a shout for Yuka Raitala, who's again sort of playing out of position at left center back right now, and I think has been good enough, at least for the time being. It's been tough. But I think he's shown some good passing out of the back, and has been a valuable player to step in there in a position that we've needed, because Dabasi is not back yet, which that'll be great to get him. I'm going to close that can of worms also. We're going to go to Q&A so that we can get this in before the end of this. A couple of questions. I'm going to shoot from the hip for you guys here. Harrison Law, thoughts on the parlay kits? Have you guys gotten a chance to sort of really get a good look at these parlay kits?
I did get a glimpse. I can't say that I was all over social media all morning, because I was at my daughter's mass this morning, and it's not really a good thing to have your phone out. But I heard that we absolutely blew up the internet with our release of the parlay kit, and how awesome the club did. So shout out to all those involved with that, because I know that takes a lot of work. But I always love the parlay stuff that has been put out. I got the parlay shoes a couple of years ago, and I get so many compliments on those kicks whenever I wear them around. So I love the cause. I love the idea. And so I think any look that goes along with it, I think is pretty sweet. But I'm a big fan.
Nice. Cal, what about you?
Yeah, same. I'll echo exactly what Kay said there. I absolutely agree. And I think it's great that we're doing it for the cause and what have you. And they've always looked good. And they always tend to look better with Minnesota United winning them as well.
Yes, absolutely. I like the parlay kits. I think that the first one was my favorite that we had. I think also just the spirit of it is fantastic. As far as Kyndra.
That was the video. I just pulled up.
Everybody go watch the parlay kit video. It's fantastic. I think the cause is fantastic, and getting plastic out of the ocean is a tremendously important thing. So let's talk about Nico Hansen. Questions, update on Nico Hansen. As far as I know, I talked to Nico last week, and it's sort of what I would call a nagging injury, it appears, and a thing that he said he doesn't always feel, but it's one of those things that shows up on the scope, and a thing that could really be he could re-injure easily. So they're trying to figure out ways to work around it. I don't know if you guys have heard anything different or more recently than that.
We spoke to Adrian Heath, who was a bit frustrated, really, that he's not been able to use Nico Hansen, because I think we all saw the pre-season that he had, and I think it's safe to say, had Nico Hansen have been available, he would have started that opening game in Seattle. So I think the last we had heard was that Nico Hansen seems to be okay. He's still not training in full. He's still sort of training off to the side and doing his own thing, still running in very, very straight lines. There's not a lot of turning on his movements at the moment. But everything seems to be okay, but the scans suggest otherwise. So, we'll just have to wait and see and be patient with that one, I think.
I think it's a blessing and a curse sometimes, all the medical technology that we have, because I think if you ask Nico, he'd probably say that he feels pretty good. But, you don't want to question the scans either. And I think they were shocked that maybe the scan looked like it did, based on how Nico said he was feeling and that he was healing. So I think just being cautious right now, and the fact that they knew they had this break coming up, why not just give him a little bit more time? That's just my pure speculation and observation on it. But I mean, it'll be another fantastic addition when they get him back in the lineup, because we saw what he did in preseason and when he was with Houston.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Some of the injuries, I think Dabasi fits into this a little bit too. And I know it's a thing that Adrian has mentioned, where it's like, they look pretty good right now. You don't have a game this week. You have one game next week and then another 3 weeks. Like, do you put a guy into a game, when it's one game and then there's going to be another break, or do you just sort of focus on the rehabilitation and try to get everybody as right as possible for like the pickup after the international break? I think seems reasonable. All right. What is next? Let's see. Sean Doyle asks, do we have anyone to help pull pressure from Reynoso? The guy is swarmed without any corner threats to support. Well, I think we have the answer, in that some guys are going to be coming for that. Is that how we feel, Cal?
Yeah, you've answered the question absolutely spot on there, Steve. We have other people that will attract attention for sure. And the way that Unu plays as well, he'll be that high pressing forward that Minnesota have needed. He will absolutely drag bodies out of position. He will distract a lot of bodies away from Manuel Reynoso for sure.
I will say the other thing, and I've had this conversation with Cal before, and this was prior to the additions, and I still think even with, just Robin Loon and Sonny Dotson and their ability to attack and create and combine, I think the other focus is just that they need a scoring threat that is going to come in as those late runs on top of the box. And we haven't had that from Jan Gregush. And they're missing that, because I do think that alleviates some of the pressure on Reynoso in a different way, in the sense that, like, if you have a late run that's coming on top of the box, he can be a scoring threat if you know he's going to put something on frame, and it opens up the space on the edge of the 18 for Reynoso to combine and work some of that magic with Hassani Dotson, Robin Lod, and the incoming players that we have now. So if Jan Gregush can continue to work on that, then I think that, or just have someone that's a scoring threat from that 8 position, that would help also in Reynoso and just relieve some of that pressure and create more space for him.
Yeah, there's sort of this domino effect that can kind of happen where, like as you get more people in, you can move other people into different positions. And that's one of those things where I think that, we've seen how effective Hassani Dotson can be attacking from that number 8 position. And he's got that cannon of a leg to get some of those shots in and sort of be that secondary attack. If you've got a left wing, you can move Hassani Dotson out of that position. You can sort of like, then you get Fragapane in and put him in the left wing. You can move Hassani into using him in a midfield role that opens up other things, again, it's like, and I think as people have noticed, obviously missing Molino last year really gave him that Reynoso, that counterweight where Molino could focus on being sort of that making runs into the box in behind and sort of being a guy where if Reynoso can beat a defender, or even better beat 2 defenders and get it to Molino will make them pay either with a shot or with that second pass. That's not quite there yet for Hassani and Lod. Lod is a great player. And again, as we said, I think underrated, but he's not like going to be a quick bang, bang decision playmaker / scorer. It's sort of like he needs a little more space on either side of those things. And when you give him that space, like he had last season with Reynoso and Molino, he could be extremely dangerous. If you get Fragapane and Unu and they're dangerous in that way, it's going to open up things for a lot of people. Okay. Matt Axelson. I think there's any chance the club seeks out another center back for the roster this season. This is a good question. Kyndra.
I say no. And I just say that based on some of the rotation that they have and the quality of the depth that they currently have, and assuming that everybody is healthy and available to play, I think there's enough other players that can slot in that position, that if they need to rotate and need to have them play in that position, and we're fortunate in that they have 2 left-footed center backs available in Yuka and Dabasi, and then Chase obviously just plays left back. But I think there's enough options there that they don't need to go and find another center back.
What about you, Cal?
I say yes. And what I will say on this is that I think they will add a centre back this season with the mindset that centre back will be used in seasons to come. So I'm suggesting they're going to go and get a young centre back who can perhaps be a part of the roster for a couple of years, I think.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's been talked about before, the age of the center back, sort of core. If you're looking at Boxall and Debasi and Coleman, they're all in that early 30s, hitting that early 30s point. And so the question is like, who is coming in behind them? Obviously there's Callum Montgomery, who hasn't seen the field yet. Nabi Kibanguchi, who can play center back, I believe. I'm not sure his position is completely secured yet, but that's definitely one of the options. You've got Yuka Raitala, who can slot in at the center back position. I mean, I think it's one of those situations where if you see the right opportunity, is there a chance? Yes. But is that opportunity there? Like, where do you find this player? Like, how are you going to get them? There's certainly questions with the team, I think, as the team goes forward. And, again, the goalkeeping depth, for example, on the team is extraordinary right now, to have that many goalkeepers who are solid. So there has, if you're looking to make a trade and you're looking to sort of establish this is the 1-1-8, this is the first choice goalkeeper, and we have our backup. And then what do we do with the rest of this talented core? Maybe that's a situation in which you try to make a move that you can move from a position of strength to get something back that can strengthen you in the center back position. It doesn't seem impossible. All right, we have one more question, I believe, also from Matt Axelson. Who sees the pitch first? DJ Taylor, Nico Hansen, Callum Montgomery, or Nabi Kibanguchi? What do you guys think? I'm going to think about that one.
Nico Hansen.
I could ask the question and then you guys can answer while I think about it. Okay,
Nico Hansen for me. I think that he will see the pitch first out of that group.
Okay, what does Cal say?
Yep, absolutely agree. Once he's available, absolutely no question about it. Nico Hansen will see the field first.
All right. Well, I'm gonna have to go counter. I'm gonna say that if and this is like if they're all healthy, Nico Hansen. If Nico's injury persists, I could maybe see DJ Taylor coming on first if Nico can't do anything, because DJ has some of that like utility guy. You might just need a body, and he's been in the 18, and yeah, maybe he gets thrown out there in a position of need because something happens. So I'm just doing that to be contrarian and give another take. Otherwise, if they're all healthy, I think Nico goes first. And I love Nico. He's great. I've really enjoyed talking to him, and he was great in preseason. So I'd love to see him out there again. Okay, that's all we have time for. Thanks for joining us for the 145th Sound of the Loons podcast, presented by Allina Health Orthopedics. Be sure to leave us a nice review on iTunes, or at the very least a 5-star rating, and follow the team on Twitter at MNUFC. You can follow Kyndra at Kyndra Sports. You can follow Cal at Cal Williams Com. You can follow me at Steve Entris. Be sure to tune in for the broadcast preview podcast, which is the companion podcast to the Sound of the Loons. It'll be back. I don't know. Are you guys doing a separate one this week, or are we just doing this one? Probably just.
I think it's just this. Yeah, I think it's just this one this week. We'll really hammer down on RSL next week. We'll break it all down.
That's right. It's a bye week. Let's rehabilitate. Let's get back healthy for next week. So check them out next week. Apologies as always to Richard Wagner, and remember, there's only one person in this whole world like you, and people can like you exactly as you are.